since well before Victor Hugo first looked at Notre Dame and thought, what if a hunchback lived in there? Writers have been inspired by Paris. Welcome to the Storytime in Paris podcast on Paris Underground Radio. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity, an award-winning filmmaker, self-professed book nerd, and creator of the Paris Underground Radio podcast network. This podcast is for anyone who loves books, loves authors, loves France, or any combination therein. Each week, I'll speak with an author whose life, stories, or characters have a connection to France. Then, these amoureux de livres will treat us to a reading from their book. Welcome back to the mini summer season of Storytime in Paris. This summer, I thought it would be fun to find 5 perfect summer reads for you. So I've got a romance, a thriller, a nonfiction book on travel, a contemporary drama, and an historical fiction. We could all use a little more love in our lives, couldn't we? Well, my first guest is here to help. Rebecca Raisin is an internationally best-selling romance writer whose books have been optioned for film. And her latest novel, A Love Letter to Paris, just came out last week. It's not a bodice-ripping romance, but a truly romantic escape. In it, Parisian Lilu sells old love letters in the Saint-Ouen flea market, and that, plus her best friend's recent heartbreak, leads her to create Paris Cupid, a matchmaking service based on handwritten correspondence. When a notorious bachelor finds her service and uses it to fall in love, her quiet life gets turned upside down. And that's not to mention the love square brewing in the market. A Love Letter to Paris is a fun, charming, delightful read. Please allow me to introduce Rebecca Raisin, author of A Love Letter to Paris. Hello, Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you about A Love Letter to Paris. But before we get to that, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I'm a romance writer from Perth, Australia. I've been writing romance now for about 10 years, mainly romantic comedies, but sometimes I'll do a more serious romance. I always set my books sort of in exotic locations like Paris or Italy. And I like writing sort of armchair travel books.
I love that. So, I feel like this book is much more of like a romantic book than your typical kind of romance, which I really love.
Yeah, it's sort of an ode to Paris, really, and to love letters. So Paris is really a character, unto itself in this as well.
Well, that was going to be my next question. So do you have a personal connection to Paris or to France?
I've just always been in love with it ever since I was younger. I've gone there so many times. So I'm not really doing my travel around the world thing because we always end up back in Paris. We've been about 5 times. And there's still so much more to see and to do. And I just love it. Every time I go there, I discover something new. And that really inspires me with my writing.
It's really interesting. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that in a minute. But first, can you tell us a little bit about the premise behind A Love Letter to Paris?
Okay, so the main character, the heroine, she's got a shop at the Saint-Ouen flea market called Ephemera. And so what she does is sells love letters and diaries that have already been penned. And she really likes holding on to sort of relics from the past. And she thinks that if we don't cherish these relics, like now we use email. So she's worried for the future that there won't be things like love letters, when you clean out someone's attic so she wants to hold on to those kind of relics from the past. And that idea actually came about, I was reading an article in The Guardian about there's an increase suddenly of people buying other people's diaries. And it just sparked the idea. And I was like, oh, that's such a cool thing to expand on. And then I was cleaning my cupboard and I found some old love letters, and that's where the idea came from. And Paris is such a romantic city, so I wanted to set it there. And then I wanted to sort of add to the plot and make it like a huge ode to romance into the city of love. So the main character is also a secret matchmaker who wants to set up Parisians using the art of love letters. So that's how that was probably a long-winded way of saying that.
No, I think that was very interesting. It's true, all of these things play a part of it. But I am now curious, have you ever purchased an old diary or love letters from someone that you didn't know?
No, I haven't, but I have looked, and it is like a rising market, which is really interesting.
It
And
is
then
really
I did
interesting.
actually find I have my grandmother's old diary. So I pulled that out, and that was really beautiful. And I actually wrote diaries for my children when I was pregnant. So I pulled them out. And so there's quite a connection to it. And I think a lot of people will relate to that. And, a lot of people do journal these days. But I feel like we also need to bring back the art of the handwritten love letter for our children and our grandchildren to pull out when they clean out the attic one day.
Yeah, it's true. It doesn't have the same ring if you go through grandma's old emails.
Yeah. And we're talking in emojis and stuff these days, everything's short.
It's just gifts all over the place.
Yeah.
So, by my count, you are a very prolific writer. And by my count, this is like your 27th book.
Something like that. There's a lot. Yeah. A few of the early ones were novellas, so they're a little bit shorter. And then I've sort of progressed on to full length novels. But I am writing a lot faster these days. I feel like my routine is really solid now. So, and my children are a bit older, so it's easier for me to sit down and really work. I don't have any other excuse now.
And this is also maybe your like fourth set in Paris. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. So this is my fourth one, and there'll be 6 all up by the time I finish this. Yeah. I've already written the next one, and I haven't told anyone this yet, but it's called We'll Always Have Paris, and that will be out in September.
Oh, how exciting. Okay. Well, I'll ask you more about that later too. So you seem to choose these really beautiful locations that you mentioned before. So I noticed a lot of your books are set in bookstores or cafes or antique shops, and then really beautiful places like Santorini or Venice or Paris. So how do you decide on the setting of each book, and what is it that keeps calling you back to Paris?
I think I'll pick the setting on a place that I actually want to travel to, because then I'm really inspired to, if I haven't been there, for instance, I haven't been to Santorini. So I enjoyed going down the rabbit hole and researching that. And I spent a really long time researching all the bits and pieces around there, and the food and the culture and the sites. And so I actually feel like I've been there. And with Paris, because I have been there, I feel like I really know the place quite well.
You do an excellent job of setting the mood of this book. And one of my own personal pet peeves, like this is not me as a book reader or as a podcast host, this is just me as Jennifer, something that really irks me, is when people write about a place that I know and love very well as though they know it when they clearly don't. Like they clearly only visited maybe a month or two, and it's a very surface understanding of the place. And that happens a lot with Paris, I find, and I'm quite protective of my adoptive country. So it really, really bugs me. And I will say that you write not only like you know Paris very well, but you write like a French person knows Paris and not even like an expat does. How do you manage that?
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's a great compliment. I think, again, that goes back to the research. I spend a lot of time researching, and I'll read blogs and I'll look on Instagram. And I call it going down the rabbit hole with all this, but it really is. It can be days and days where I'll, like, for example, there was at the flea market, there is a spacecraft. I call it the spacecraft Futuro House. And I was really interested, like, why is that there? Where did it come from? So I emailed the press department of the market, and I found out the whole story behind it. And they actually offered me a tour. They were like, oh, we could meet you there. And I was like, oh, I'm in Australia. So, and even though that's really like, it's like half a paragraph in the book, but I try to do that when I'm talking about anything in any country to make sure I do have my facts straight. I do spend a lot of time, even if it's only a sentence, I just want to make sure it's definitely correct.
It's very impressive. I told you when we were emailing back and forth that I wouldn't have been surprised to find out that you were living in Saint-Ouen, like that this was your local hangout. Really, it was.
I wish I did.
So a good part of A Love Letter to Paris is set in this market, in the Saint-Ouen flea market, which seems like sort of an unlikely Parisian locale for a love story. Why did you choose to set the novel there?
I really liked the idea of it when I found it, because I've been to a lot of flea markets around Paris, but I really liked the idea of that one because it's so huge. And it felt like it would be its own sort of city, like a village where there would be everyone knows everyone and there would be all that gossip. And, it felt like a really organic sort of way. And I also like not talking about the main, the Eiffel Tower and all the main sort of tourist attractions. I like trying to show readers other parts of the city that they might not have ever heard of. So when I did a bit of research on that and, there was the spacecraft, I was like, right, I've got to set it here.
And is there actually a stall in the flea market that has something to do with love letters and this sort of ephemera, or is that entirely from your own imagination?
That's from my imagination, but I do think there would be something there like that, because I know with the flea markets in Paris, it's just, they're full of weird and wonderful, like nothing is thrown out there. And I just love that. I love that everything has value.
You answer this question really beautifully in the book, but my mom asked me, and so I'm going to ask you, why would anyone care about someone else's old diaries and old love letters?
Oh, I think it's sort of peeking behind the curtain in someone else's life. Like for me, I'd be very interested. So I don't know what that says about me. But I would love, it's almost like reading, a fictional book, reading someone's love letters or diaries and seeing, what really happens behind closed doors. So I was really intrigued by that. And actually at one point in the first draft, the first diary that she reads, Margot's diary, actually had a bigger thread throughout it, but then it was kind of taking over the plot. So I had to change that. So yeah, it was really hard for me not to write someone's whole diary and get carried away.
Yeah, it's fun to see those little peaks when we get them. I tend to agree. I think it, like, I don't know if it's a nosiness in me or whatever it is, but I would be fascinated.
That's how I feel, very nosy.
That's also why I hope that someone throws away all of my diaries when I'm gone, because I don't want anyone nosing around my diary.
I did actually speak about this book at an event recently, and I told them, because it's not out yet here, and there was audible gasps about what they would read my diary, someone would buy my diary. So I was like, it's actually a thing.
So scary.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people now thinking,
I need to put something in my last will and testament, like, please get rid of my diaries. So there's this idea, and we touched on this a little bit before, but there's this idea that maybe people used to be more romantic and that it was more romantic to handwrite these love letters than to say, like, swipe right. Do you think it's true? Do you think that people used to be more romantic in yesteryear?
I think so. And I think we talk a lot in the book. I talk a lot about the slow burn romance and the idea of building romance slowly without even meeting the person. And I think that's quite beautiful. Like there's also a part in there where the florist talks about the language of flowers. And back in the day, if you sent a bouquet, it would, whatever flowers you chose had a message. And I loved that. I thought that was so beautiful. And it's not that we're doing it wrong. It's just we could probably add a little bit more romance.
Curious about what's going on in Paris right now? Don't Miss This takes you beyond the typical and the obvious with a weekly roundup of the best of what's happening in Paris each week. Every Monday, you'll get 20 to 35 new Parisian events with descriptions, links, and all the details sent directly to your inbox. Never wonder what you're missing out on again. Sign up for Don't Miss This on Patreon at patreon.com/Paris Underground Radio. We'll be right back with Storytime in Paris after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. I love the idea of flowers being their own language and sending hidden messages or secret meanings. I love that so much. It's such a beautiful idea. I have a friend who's a florist who's obsessed with that idea too. And it's just so lovely to hear her talk about. I mean, it's sort of an ancient art. We don't really do that anymore, but it's so lovely to hear that. And I also think that there is something, I don't know if we're more or less romantic, but I think there's something very romantic about the idea of spending time on someone or something, and the necessity of having to sit down and write something by hand, think about it ahead of time. If you make a mistake, you've got to either start over or make a huge black mark on the page you've been working on. There's something in that that forces you to be in the moment and take more time thinking about the person that you're writing to. There's something there.
Yeah, and I love the idea that it's not really, it doesn't cost you anything, a bit of paper. It's just your time, and I think that's what's romantic about it, that they're on your mind and you can, spend that time. It doesn't cost anything. It's not extravagant, but it's really heartfelt and beautiful.
So it's kind of based on this premise that Lilu begins her matchmaking company. It's sort of beyond the scope of the novel, but do you think that a service like this could work today, like some sort of matchmaking service where people exchange love letters could actually work in this day and age?
I think it could. I think it would be beautiful, but maybe I'm biased.
You spent too long living in the world of your book.
Why isn't it real?
Well, I mean, if you said now you've got your writing down to a ritual, maybe you've got extra time to create your own handwritten love letter matchmaking service.
In Paris.
Sure. I mean, here, I'm happy to be a guinea pig for you. So,
okay, great.
excellent. Well, now that that's taken care of. One of the things I was really drawn to in this book were the characters. And one of the things that I really love is that even though this matchmaking service, Paris Cupid, starts as sort of a matchmaking excuse for young, pretty, newly heartbroken Parisienne Emilienne, most of the matches are not for these hot, young, typical couples that you might expect, especially in a romance. And I'm thinking specifically of like gruff widower Guillaume or this brash florist Coraline. Why were these the characters that you decided upon?
I like the idea of this being a service for people who were lost or lonely or heartbroken, and the general way people fall in love or use dating apps wasn't working for them. And I wanted to show more relatable people and show that them getting a happy ever after or them getting a happy for now. And yeah, I really wanted it to be, I guess, relatable. So the average reader feels like that could be them as well. And I tend to write a lot of characters like that where they don't have it figured out, or, they're quite quirky, or their flaws are quite evident. And I just feel that's more believable. And I feel like, yeah, readers enjoy reading about people like them rather than the, gorgeous looking, got it all together rom-com heroine of the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's two ways you can go, right? You can live vicariously through the young ingenue, or you can imagine it actually happening to yourself.
Yeah.
And so this seems more that route. And the other thing that I really like is that it also makes it feel like love is for everyone, in the sense that these are older people, some of them as well, people who think like, maybe I'm just done with love. And they end up finding their own versions of it as well. And that's lovely.
Yeah, I really wanted to show sort of a broad spectrum of people. And yeah, I sort of fell in love with a lot of those characters, even though some of them didn't deserve love. Well, it felt like that. But I hope that I showed that their backstory, that everyone deserves love.
Oh, that's funny. Speaking of backstory, so the book actually starts with a scandal, if you will. Will you talk to us a little bit about the scandal and why you decided to start with that?
So we always sort of get told you can't write someone who is a cheater. And so I thought, well, I want to write someone who's a cheater without realizing she didn't know she was, dating a married man, and she thought she'd found the one. So I thought, you hear about it all the time, that people, like, I've got friends that are on dating apps who found the one and then it turned out they were married. And so I thought I wanted to write it in a really relatable, modern way. So the same thing happens to my heroine, and I felt like she handled it really well, considering she didn't know, and it was such a shock. and having it happen so openly in front of all her colleagues, and then her having to deal with the fallout of that. I thought it added a bit of drama to see how she could handle that and how she would move forward.
It's true. And it's also interesting because it's balanced against the stereotype that people have of the French anyway, that everyone has a lover and a mistress or a whatever a mister, I don't know what the male equivalent is. But here is someone who is in that situation and actually reacts, like takes it quite personally, is quite upset about the fact that she's been caught in this scandal.
Yeah, and then that sort of puts her off finding love. And I thought that was a nice twist to it. So the single matchmaker, like, would you trust a single matchmaker who had a sort of disastrous love life? Like, it does go back in the book about some of her other relationships, which weren't great either. So I thought that was an interesting premise to work around. Like, would you trust a single matchmaker? And she's anonymous. So I thought that was interesting for a reader to go, would I trust her?
Well, yeah, and that this whole scandal helps justify why she wants to stay anonymous too. And so there's a push and pull there too, which becomes quite interesting as the book evolves.
Yeah.
And Lilu, speaking of which, she gets caught in her own sort of love mystery. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, that was really interesting writing the book, actually, because she's sort of in a love square, I called it, because there was 3 new neighbours have moved into the market, and each of them are appealing in their own way, but they're all very different men. And the whole way through I was writing it, I still wasn't sure who she'd end up with. So it wasn't until the very end that I was like, that one. But I hope that, I hope readers enjoy that part of it as well, because I was really confused because I end up liking all the men for their various characteristics. And so I felt really bad just choosing one in the end. I was like, am I making the right choice for her?
That's very funny. That was going to be my next question was, did you always knew which I was going to end up being? So it's funny to know that you didn't.
No, I didn't. And that's what held me up. I actually was a couple of weeks late with the first round on this one. And I just said to my editor, I can't decide. So she had a quick read of it and we decided on the hero, which usually doesn't happen. You usually have a very clear idea.
Yeah. Did it change did you have to go back and rewrite things to make it make sense in the end? Or was it always sort of leaning that way and you just understood that at the end?
We did go back and I did go and add a certain thread to it, which you will probably know. And then I did add some other bits and pieces, but I think it was always probably leaning that way. But then one of them particularly, I just thought was so gorgeous. And I think I just fell in love with him and I wanted it to be him. So, but I was like, is this right for her? No.
So I think now would be a really good time to hear some from the book. And just so that our listeners know, Rebecca has asked me to do the reading today, which I'm more than happy to do. But will you sort of set us up contextually? Is there anything that we need to know before I do?
Okay, so I was thinking we would jump ahead to chapter 3, which is the present day in the storyline. That gives you a bit more of an idea of what's going on and what my heroine does for a job. And the previous bit of that is how Paris Cupid all came about. So we're going to skip that and jump ahead.
Chapter 3. Now. I'm woefully late to my day job after a long night of matching the lost, star-crossed, and broken-hearted of Paris. The early July summer sunshine boosts my mood and makes the long walk to the market an enjoyable one. I find myself thinking back to when my little side business came to life. That wintry day when I met with a despondent Emilienne who had all but sworn off love. Her sadness felt like a plea for help, a call to arms, and it gets me thinking, why do we get punished when we set standards for love? It's not as though Emilienne was asking for too much. All she wanted to find in a relationship was kindness, monogamy, and the hope of building a future together. And now she has, thanks to the art of love letter writing. Since that fateful coffee catch-up, Paris Cupid has flourished, although I've had to keep my role anonymous. My name is still mud after le scandale. Not everyone has forgiven me, despite my protestations of innocence. And it didn't help matters when Frederic recently visited the market and told me he still loved me. I had to resort to using my broom to drive him away, and it dredged up the whole scandal again. There were whispers that I must secretly be seeing him, otherwise why would he drop by like that? The market is like a petri dish when it comes to gossip, and left unattended, it grows, multiplying until everyone hears an exaggerated version of the story that just isn't true. Having Paris Cupid to pour my time into has been good for me in more ways than one, since men aren't exactly beating my door down to ask me on a date. Love has truly blossomed for a number of my matches, including Emilienne. Her kindred spirit is a man named Remy, who I found to be sensitive and soulful. He has a good understanding of healthy boundaries, which, according to her application, had been an issue with men in the past. Emilienne is the type of woman who needs her space, quiet time to retreat and reflect, and Remy agreed that that was important to him too. It's been a whirlwind since startup 6 months ago, and it warms my heart that future generations might one day unearth these Paris Cupid love letters, sit with a mug of tea, settle in, and read a sweeping romance, just like in the books. The only problem is, these days my bespoke little matchmaking biz is taking a big chunk of my time, and I'm finding it hard to balance both worlds, my market stall and my secret Cupid life, hence my lateness this and every morning. Matching lovebirds also makes me yearn for my own love affair, but I still feel at odds with how to go about it for myself. Short of the universe throwing a man in my way, I don't see how it's ever going to happen now that I'm working more than ever. To get enough matches so that I could faithfully promise people a chance at love, I've had to come up with all sorts of advertising campaigns for social media. It's where most of my clients have found Paris Cupid, and I've tried other avenues of advertising like letterbox drops, podcast ads, even a tiny little billboard at a Montmartre bus station, and posters glued up around Saint-Ouen flea market. Word-of-mouth referrals have been big as well. The income Paris Cupid is producing has really helped when I have slow weeks at Ephemera, so I remind myself that the extra work is worth it when I'm feeling the pressure of keeping everything afloat. As I increase my pace, I pass en kiosque à presse and catch a sight of a magazine headline that stops me in my tracks. TV star Emmanuel Roux is engaged, thanks to Paris Cupid. What? My heart leaps into my throat. I dig around my handbag for a purse and hand over some euros with a shaky, "Bonjour, monsieur." Once I'm far enough away from the kiosk, I duck into an apartment doorway to read the article. Self-confessed playboy of Paris, Emmanuel Roux, from Twilight Dream TV fame, has found the one and proposed atop the Eiffel Tower. She's not from showbiz, he says. We were matched on a new underground site called Paris Cupid. We asked Emmanuel why the playboy of Paris would need to use a relatively unknown matchmaking site to find love. For anonymity, he claims. We did a little digging into Paris Cupid, a small Parisian startup that claims to find love for the lost, the lonely, and those who feel they're unlucky in love. This is no Insta-date hookup site. Members commit to writing love letters and getting to know each other slowly by good old-fashioned courtship. My days as a bachelor are over, Emmanuel says with a determined set to his jaw. This cannot be. I vet every single member as assiduously as possible with the skills I have at hand. I search their social media accounts and their online presence. So it comes as a nasty shock to find that I've matched the so-dubbed Playboy of Paris without being aware of it. I'd never approve membership to a man who dates and dashes like Emmanuel Roux famously does. Did he use a pseudonym? Photos can easily be doctored these days, but I wouldn't have paid much attention to his pictures anyway. I'm more interested in what they write about love than their physical appearance. Whatever social media accounts he'd given me must have appeared legitimate when I did my first round of checks. My mind spins with worry. Who did he claim to be? And worse, who did I match him with? For all his protestations, I don't believe for a minute that Emmanuel Roux's Playboy days are over. This is an unmitigated disaster for Paris Cupid, which I genuinely built for those who had given up on finding love. I also kept it exclusive so I could cope with the workload. I quicken my pace and head to Paris Saint-Ouen flea market, to my stall Ephemera, where I sell my love letters, prayer books, and scripted diaries. Is Paris the most romantic city in the world? Host Lily Heisey answers this very question in her podcast, Romancing in Paris, which takes you through the city, arrondissement by arrondissement, by exploring the most romantic and hidden spots Paris has to offer. Listen now to Romancing in Paris on ParisUndergroundRadio.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be right back with Storytime in Paris after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. Thank you so much. You mentioned before that you have a book coming out in September called We'll Always Have Paris. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that book is about?
Oh, that one was really, really fun to write. That one is set in the six. So my heroine gets a rundown hotel in the divorce and she's not very happy about it. She is a romance writer and she has this terrible divorce and he ends up with the apartment and she gets the hotel. And so she has to sort of renovate this hotel to sell it. And it was really fun. And it's based at Christmas time. So Christmas in Paris, it was really fun to write. And it's quite long because I just had so much to say. And so she also makes a literary map of Paris, which is something that I love. I spent a lot of time in Paris going to all the haunts where Hemingway drank and where there's just plaques and where the first Shakespeare and Co. actually was. So it's just chock-a-block full of literary history in Paris as well.
That sounds amazing. It would be such a dream to renovate a hotel in the sixth in Paris. Like, yes, please.
Well, it's a boutique literary hotel as well in the end. And there's actually a bit of a mystery. They find a secret room.
Ooh.
And they find a secret in the room.
Okay.
100-year-old secret. So, yeah, it was really fun.
I'm definitely intrigued. So that will be the fifth book set in Paris, correct?
Yes.
So, and the fourth one is this one set in the Love Letter to Paris set in Saint-Ouen. So where are the other three?
So the first one's called The Little Bookshop on the Seine. And then there is The Little Antique Shop Under the Eiffel Tower. And the other one is The Little Perfume Shop off the Champs-Elysees. And the sixth one is going to be a bookshop. But it's a bookshop bar and it's got a bit of a twist to it as well.
Very exciting. That's wonderful. We now have a lot of things to add to our to-be-read pile. So that's very exciting.
Yes.
So where can people find you if they want to keep up to date with what you're doing, with all of these books that you have coming out? Where can people find you online?
So you can find me. My Facebook page is probably my preferred method. I really try and chat to everyone on there a fair bit. So that's just Rebecca Raisin author. And there's a readers group, Rebecca Raisin's exclusive readers. But otherwise, I'm everywhere. I'm on X, I'm on Instagram. I make some TikToks that get about 200 views. So I'm still learning. I'm everywhere.
Fabulous. Well, I will include links to everything so that everyone can find you really easily. Thank you so much, Rebecca. This was wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Oh, thank you. It was amazing.
Thank you again to Rebecca Raisin for being just as delightful and charming as her book. You can find Rebecca on Facebook at Rebecca Raisin Author, on Instagram at Rebecca Raisin Writes, and on her website, RebeccaRaisin.com. Please join me next week when I'll be speaking with Kimberly Bell about her thriller, Paris Widow. Please check